And I'd like to start my little segment here with a big thanks to Karen Christensen, the fabulous, fabulous editor, publisher of Rotman Magazine, and the, in some sense, reason for these four pieces to be together here in this session, because they're all published in her fabulous magazine. So thanks, Karen. A New Way to Think. This is the new book that I've just released. And what's the book about? The book is about models and you. I'd like, oops, let's see if we can advance it. There we go. Models and you. It's how do we use models most productively, and how do we get trapped into using them unproductively? And human beings use models for everything. We have more informal models of here's how I hopefully advance my career. People have a model for doing that. Here's how I organize my closet. You've got a model for that. Some of them are very formal models, and for the finance geeks out there, this is the Black-Scholes option pricing model that tells you how to price an option. And what I'm interested in is if the question of whether you own your model or your model owns you. What's the difference between the two? The difference between the two is in the former case, right, where you own your model, you want your model to do something for you, you utilize it, and it serves its purpose. It accomplishes what you want the model to accomplish, and you continue to use it. But if it doesn't accomplish what you want to accomplish, you'll drop it. You'll phase it out. You'll move to a different model. That's a situation of you owning your model. Unfortunately, in the world of business, we have a situation where I believe many models own us. And how do we know that? It's we keep using a model over and over again. It doesn't produce the results we wish it did. But we tend to blame ourselves and say, well, we mustn't have done it right. We mustn't have done it kind of aggressively enough. We didn't invest enough in it. Rather than stepping back and asking the fundamental question, is this a deeply flawed model or not? And in the book, I talk about 14 models. I have 14 chapters on 14 different models that I think are dominant models that are owning us, and I'm encouraging us to recognize that there's a better model to replace them with. And so I just picked one of them because I just thought it would be interesting for this audience. Hopefully, it fits and provides some diversity across the other talks. So this is a model that creates the following paradox. Executive frustration with the pace and level of innovation. As people know, I work with executives all the time, and this would be probably their number one complaint, is that our innovation level isn't high enough and the pace is far too slow. But there's a paradox, because it is arguable that it is a golden age for disruptive startups, whether they be in Francesco's quantum computing or any of many other fields. So how can we have this frustration in existing companies with the level and pace of innovation and having a golden age for disruptive startups at the same time? And I believe it is because the dominant model for making decisions in the corporate world has become rigorous data analytics. And in fact, I think this has been going on. This model has been increasingly dominating for over 50 years now. Business schools in particular teach that the only good decision is a decision that's made on the basis of data and analysis of data. And it's in the field, in the economics and politics field as well. If you're not making your decisions based on the data, you are some kind of a sloppy manager, sloppy kind of superstitious manager. But there's a fundamental problem with this model. This model has a challenge, and the challenge relates to time. So there's a data challenge with time. At the time of analysis, so at the precise time that the data is being analyzed to make the decision, time t equals 0, We've got two eras, the entire time that's come before that particular moment in time and the future. And there is something about data that is important. 100% of all data at the point that you're going to do analysis thereof, 100% of the data is in the past. There is no data about the future at the time that you're making your analysis. Now, one of the things we're taught, and that corporate world is taught, everybody who's in the corporate world and graduated from university in the last 40 years has taken a statistics course, and they're told on no uncertain terms that if you're going to make an inference about a universe, you must have a representative sample. Right? So if you're trying to figure out what people want in car styling today, if you went and interviewed 100% men or 100% women or 100% young people, 100% old people, and then said on the basis of that you can determine what people want, a statistician would blanch and say, well, no, you're making a absolutely terrible error. In fact, you don't have no idea in what direction your error will be. All we know is that you cannot take that sample, that analysis of data, to be able to make an inference about the universe. Right? So if that's true, and we're using data analytics to make a decision, right, and that data has to be representative, and the only thing we can sample, the only data we can collect is from the era, the past, we're making a fundamental assumption without, I would argue, realizing it. The implicit assumption is the future is identical to the past. Right? Because for that sample to be representative, the future has to be identical to the past, because otherwise the sample will be unrepresentative. If the sample of the past looks like X and the sample of the future looks like not X, then any inference we've drawn from the sample about the past will not be extrapolatable to the condition of the future. And Stats 101 tells us that. In fact, a statistics professor will blanch at the idea of you have used the past to predict the future. It's just that is not taken into account in the dominant model in the world of business today. It's simply not taken into account, that fundamental assumption. What's a better model? As in the book, I don't just leave it to here, I hate this model and it doesn't work. I insist on providing a better model. And a better model for decisions is there are two distinctive parts of the world, and they require fundamentally different decision approaches. So rather than the one decision approach being used everywhere, which is currently the case, again, the business educational system says in no uncertain terms the only good decisions are made on the basis of analysis of the data. But there are two parts of the world, and these are parts of the world that I most certainly did not identify. But they were identified by one of the world's greatest thinkers of all time, and that's Aristotle. And what Aristotle did was create the first. He's the world's first data analyst, the world's first scientist, because he was interested in how you can determine the cause of a given effect that we see. And he wrote something that's called Analytica Posteriora. And that book is the most important book ever written in the history of science. Anybody who takes anything in the history of science will read that book, and it's the foundations of science. I mean, people will say the scientific method came out of the scientific revolution. Bacon, Newton, Descartes, Galileo created it. They didn't so much create it as formalized what Aristotle had said 2,000 years before that, 2,500 years ago. And what he said is there's one part of the world where things cannot be other than they are. And what I typically use to illustrate that is, if I take this pen and I let go of it, what'll happen to it? It'll fall. If I did that last week, what happened? It fell. 10 years ago, 50 years ago, it fell. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, 1,000 years from now, it'll fall. It'll fall here in Fort Lauderdale. It'll fall there in Toronto. It will always fall. That is because that is part of, pen drops are part of the world where things cannot be other than they are. There's a universal force called gravity. It doesn't change. It's always there, and it always does the same thing. And in that part of the world, Aristotle said, use my method of reasoning, which is analyzing the past to make your inference, because the future is identical to the past. So we're good there. The problem is the world took Aristotle's method and said, you got to apply it to everything. Literally, that is not an exaggeration. The modern world thinks that you should apply this method to everything, from politics, economic policy, everything, medicine, epidemiology, everything. It should be applied to. And that's certainly been the case in dealing with COVID. Follow the science, follow the science, follow the science, follow the science, right? That's the methodology. But the guy who invented science, Aristotle, who invented science, said there's another part of the world. And there's a part of the world where things can be other than they are. Well, I used to illustrate that as this thing, right? In 1999, there were 0 smartphones in the world, because the first one, the BlackBerry, Canadian BlackBerry, came out in 2000. How many are there now? 4.4 billion of them last time I looked at the statistics, and it keeps growing. And now, notice this was within arm's length, and that's because if this ever gets out of arm's length of human beings now, the human being in question either gets cold chills or the hives or some terrible thing happens to them. Our world has changed completely, the way we operate it and how we behave on the basis of this thing, which is illustrative of the part of the world where things can be other than they are. And in fact, in the world of business, that's most of the world of business, where things can and in fact are on the way to being other than they are, often in ways we simply cannot predict. And on this part of the world, Aristotle was extremely clear. He said, do not use my scientific method in this part of the world. So the interesting thing is that the world has adopted the methodology of Aristotle absolutely hook, line, and sinker. So he's so important, his thoughts are so important that we've adopted them, and at the same time ignored his pointed advice. And the reason is he gave the advice in a book that is read by almost nobody and in no syllabus of any course you'll find anywhere. But what he said is, in this part of the world, your process for thinking and deciding is centered on imagination. What he said is, in this part of the world, you must imagine possibilities and choose the one for which the most compelling argument can be made. The most compelling argument can be made. So he doesn't say on the basis of the data, because there isn't data on the future. And what I would argue is that's the important thing for the world to change, which is to recognize these two parts of the world. And I would also say that one of the things that I've come to the conclusion of is that this obsession with data analytics and science has driven us to focus our attention completely on the mean, right? The center of the distribution. And I think innovation is going to come from the anomalies. We try to create an answer to what does the center of the distribution mean? What's going on there? And we don't look at the anomalies. But as you go forward, the thing I'd say to you is, if you're inclined to use data analytics, simply ask yourself the question, am I sufficiently confident that I'm in the part of the world where things cannot be other than they are? If so, analyze. If not, heed Aristotle's warning and use imagination and argumentation, reasoning, rather than data analytics, or you'll get yourself into huge trouble. And that's my goal, to have you take ownership of your models. Don't keep using a model that doesn't work.